Sometimes, occasionally perhaps, the truth really is stranger than fiction. The case you are about to try, on any view, is an extraordinary case. These were the words of Peter Makepeace KC, prosecutor in the case of Dr. Thomas Kwan, as his trial began at Newcastle Crown Court on October 3, 2024. The prosecutor went on to outline what he described as an audacious plan to murder a man in plain sight. The case was described as exceptional in gravity of preparation and premeditation. Chillingly, the victim was poisoned by what he believed at the time to be a COVID booster jab. Though he survived, the life of Patrick O'Hara, 71 at the time, was permanently changed, and he was left, in his own words, as a shell of an individual. Dr. Quan of Ingleby Barwick Teesside was charged with the attempted murder of O'Hara, who was his mother's partner, in Newcastle on January 22, 2024. The GP, aged 53 at the time of the trial, was a general practitioner here at the Happy House Surgery in Thorney Close, Sunderland. He was described by the prosecutor as a respected and experienced medical doctor in general practice. But from November of the preceding year, at the latest, and probably, the prosecution added, long before then, he devised an intricate plan to kill his mother's long-term partner. As the prosecution put it, on any view, that man had done absolutely nothing to offend Mr. Quan in any way whatsoever. He was, however, a potential impediment to Mr. Quan inheriting his mother's estate upon her death. Mr. Quan used his encyclopedic knowledge of and research into poisons to carry out his plan. The plan was to disguise himself as a community nurse, attend Mr. O'Hara's address, the home that Mr. O'Hara shared with the defendant's mother, and inject Mr. O'Hara with a dangerous poison under the pretext of administering COVID booster injection. It was a very carefully planned scheme. It involved Mr. Quan forging National Health Service documentation to lure Mr. O'Hara, the intended victim, to his plan. It involved him adopting a personal disguise to shield his identity from his victim and his mother. It involved the falsification of number plates on his car to try to evade detection. It involved him using false details to book into a local hotel to use as the base for his operation. Mr. Makepeace added it was a plan to murder a man right in front of his own mother, that man's life partner. The court heard that Quan and his mother had a strained relationship, partly caused by her son's expected inheritance from her. Her will stated that her home would be passed over to Mr. O'Hara should she die before him. But by late 2022, tensions had grown so much between Quan and his mother regarding her finances that she refused to take his calls. In November of that year, police were called to the couple's address after Quan forced his way inside to, quote, pester his mother about the matters. Officers attended and Quan was warned about his behaviour. But 12 months later, Mr. O'Hara received a letter on NHS paper signed by a Mr. Raj Patel, informing him that he was a priority for a visit by the community-associated nursing team. The letter was in fact completely faked, authored by Mr. Quan himself on his home computer with the NHS logo copy and pasted. As Mr. Makepeace added, the National Health Community Associated Nursing Team did not in fact exist, it was his invention. Mr. Raj Patel, registered nurse, did not exist, it was his invention. The letter was the first outward sign of the terrible scheme that Mr. Quan had been planning to execute. Mr. Makepeace told jurors the next stage of Quan's plan was to create his window of opportunity by booking a holiday between January the 22nd and 26th. A second NHS letter was then sent which offered Mr. O'Hara a home visit on January the 22nd between 9 AM and 1 PM. Mr. Makepeace said once again this letter was fake, very carefully and painstakingly prepared by Mr. Quan on his home computer. Jurors heard Quan stay at a Premier Inn nearby the night before the injection under a false name. Another text reminder was sent to Mr. O'Hara by Quan from a different SIM card, and on January the 22nd he left the Premier Inn wearing a clinical mask, blue surgical gloves, a flat cap and a long coat. Mr. Makepeace added, of course there is no CCTV inside Mr. O'Hara's home, but very fortunately Mr. O'Hara survived the attack and thus we have his account of what happened. He recalled the man he believed to be a nurse attending and knocking on the door and being allowed entry. He described that man as being dressed from head to toe and wearing surgical gloves and a mask. He was also wearing tinted spectacles. After being let inside the home on St Thomas Street in Newcastle, Quan asked Mr. O'Hara to fill out a medical form, took his blood pressure and a urine sample. Miss Leung then entered the room and asked Quan if he could take her blood pressure, oblivious to who the nurse was, their son. Quan, in what the court heard was broken English with an Asian accent, told Mr. O'Hara he needed a COVID booster, even though he had only had one 3 months ago. Mr. Makepeace said, as most of us do, Mr. O'Hara averted his eyes and looked away as the nurse proceeded to dispense an injection into his upper left arm. Immediately, Mr. O'Hara felt a terrible pain and he jumped back and he shouted, "Bloody hell," and explained the immediate and intense pain in his arm. The supposed nurse reassured him it was not an uncommon, bad reaction and it was nothing to be concerned about. He then swiftly packed his things and left in a hurry. Miss Leung came downstairs again and commented in passing that the man had been the same height as her son. Upon that comment, and for the first time, Mr. O'Hara began to suspect something was very wrong. He went out into the street to see if he could catch up with the nurse to get some reassurance. Mr. Quan had been in his mother's home undetected, pretending to be a nurse for 3/4 of an hour. O'Hara was too late out into the street. He could find no trace of the nurse. He returned home to find the pain in his arm was getting worse. Quan headed back to the hotel via a stop to a branch of Greg's before he drove home to Teesside. In pain, Mr. O'Hara contacted his own GP and found from a local hospital that the NHS organisation which had written to him did not exist. He then went to the nearby accident and emergency unit at the Royal Victoria Infirmary, where staff initially believed his injuries were due to a clumsy COVID vaccine. He was sent home with antibiotics and painkillers, but returned the next day when his arm had blistered and was seriously discoloured. Mr. Makepeace said at the hospital the doctors were baffled as to what the cause of the deteriorating injury was. Blood tests were taken and analysis carried out, but no meaningful results obtained. By now it was clear to the medical professionals that the infection was spreading and the damage increasing in seriousness and magnitude. It was clear surgical intervention would be necessary. Mr. O'Hara was diagnosed with necrotizing fasciitis, a life-threatening flesh-eating disease, as he underwent numerous operations. Over the coming days, Mr. O'Hara had diseased flesh cut away from his arm, while specialists tried to identify the poison. Obviously, their chances of saving his life would be all the more greater if they knew what they were dealing with, Mr. Makepeace said. All biopsies and blood tests carried out failed to identify the toxin involved, and Mr. O'Hara remained in intensive care for a prolonged period of weeks. Mr. O'Hara, who stated the attack should have been the end of him, said he was caused excruciating pain, spent 5 weeks in hospital, facing ongoing treatment, and had been to hell and back. The court heard 5 days after the attack, Mr. O'Hara received another NHS-style letter detailing the results of his blood tests before the jab was given.
This time in the morning. Is it Dr. Quan? Yes. Dr. Quan, hello.
A Royal Mail package meant for Mr. O'Hara was then intercepted, containing over-the-counter iron supplements and sent by Quan. Quan was arrested at his home address and subsequently found on his computer was a poisoner's handbook and a book on guidance for murder investigations. Several files regarding poisons to kill a person and ideals and poisons to use to evade detection were also uncovered on his computer.
The time is now 06:30 hours, okay? I'm arresting you for the offence of the suspicion of the attempted murder of according to common law and the Criminal Offence Act 1981 and administering a poison or noxious substance according to section 23 of the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861. Now both of those offences occurred in Newcastle upon Tyne on Monday the 22nd of January 2024, okay? So you don't have to say...
Further inquiries found that Quan had installed spying software on his mother's computer as a way of monitoring her and her then partner's computer usage for a period of over a year. When Quan's garage was raided by police, they found it was stocked with poisons such as arsenic and a recipe to make deadly ricin and chemicals which could have caused an explosion. Jurors at Dr. Kwan's trial heard that the medic had an obsession with money, felt an entitlement to money and previously forged legal documents in relation to the share he received from his father's will. Mr. Makepeace said Quan had a meticulous plan to kill his mother's partner so he could get her inheritance despite having his own money. Here is a man, he said, who irrationally has harboured an intention to kill a man in the worst imaginable way. He told the court that Quan had a wealthy lifestyle. He had made an offer on a property in the south of England for £2 million. The court heard even after Quan was remanded in custody over the attempted killing, his letters to his wife still largely centred on financial matters. Mr. Makepeace said a chilling feature of the correspondence was when Quan referred to Mr. O'Hara's potential entitlement to compensation, where he said, One old man's compensation for 3 young lives ruined, where's the justice in that? During his speech to the court, the victim, Mr. O'Hara, said, "At roughly 9:45 on Monday, January the 22nd, my life completely changed forever. This is a date that I will never forget as long as I shall live."
In order to cure this disease, I underwent 3 separate operations, which required surgeons to cut away large parts of my left arm to ensure that all the signs of the disease had been removed, so that it wouldn't continue to spread. In addition, I had to undertake 2 separate skin grafts, which involved removing the skin from my left thigh and placing it on my injured arm. He added, "In total, I spent over 5 weeks in hospital. I can honestly say that there was never a day that went past where I did not feel in pain." Upon being discharged from hospital, I had to ensure that I conducted my own physiotherapy to help rebuild the lost muscle and tissue mass which had been removed from my body. Overall, this incident should have been the end of me. The nature of what occurred to my body has left me speechless. Had it not been for medical intervention, I am positive that not only would I have lost my left arm, but my life as well. I suffer from extreme fatigue. Every time I get changed, I'm aware of the disfigurement to my arm, which is an everlasting memory of the attack on me, and this in addition has shattered my self-confidence. He added, "I genuinely feel as if I've been to hell and back. Thomas will never comprehend or know what it's like to suffer in the manner of which I am."
Dr. Thomas Kwan was charged with attempted murder and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He pleaded not guilty to these offences, but did admit a charge of administering a noxious substance.
On the second full day of his trial, though, he pleaded guilty to attempted murder and he was remanded in custody. In November, he returned to Newcastle Crown Court where he was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months in prison.